Humanity's cradle, the Earth, had become its tomb. 3 centuries ago, a solar flare of unimaginable fury had boiled the oceans, scorched the continents, and stripped the world of its breath. But humanity, in its final, desperate moments, had built a refuge. Not a ship to escape to the stars, but a great beast to crawl upon the scarred face of its dead mother. They called it, the Scarab, a colossal harvester city ship, a kilometer long, forever crawling across the planet's dark side, forever fleeing the dawn that would mean its end. For 15 generations, the Scarab was the only world its inhabitants knew. It was a world of recycled air, recycled water, and recycled stories. And the most important story, the one preached by the overseer from the command deck on high, was the first and final doctrine: the earth is poison. The sky is fire. The ship is life. The ship is all there is. Finn was a child of this world. A lower decker. His home was the grime and soot of the salvage holds, his sky the rust-eaten gantries and tangled conduits far above. His job, like his father's before him, was to venture out in armored suits during the dark shifts, scavenging the bones of the dead cities the Scarab crawled over. He was 16, and he had never seen the sun, never felt a natural breeze, and never known a thing that had not been built from scavenged, sterile metal. Attention, all decks. This is Overseer Valerius. The dark shift approaches its terminus. The dawn line is advancing. All salvage crews must return to the bays. Remember your duties. Remember your sacrifices. For the ship is life. And the will of the ship is the will of us all. Finn secured the last piece of salvaged alloy to the magnetic lift and watched it ascend into the darkness of the cargo bay. Another shift over. Another day of not dying. That was the best one could hope for on the lower decks. But today, something was different. A flicker of light, deep in the forbidden, unstable. But Finn's curiosity, a dangerous and rare commodity in a society built on obedience, got the better of him. As the rest of his crew ascended, he slipped away into the labyrinthine wreckage of the city's underbelly, a place where the Scarab's massive treads had compressed centuries of ruin into a maze of twisted metal and shadow. He followed the memory of the glint, navigating by the light of his helmet. He found it in a section of the hold that had been sealed off for generations, the bulkhead warped by time and pressure. A single, heavy, circular door, unlike any of the ship's standard designs. It was a relic of the before times, and it was from behind this door that he had seen the light. The locking mechanism was ancient, but a piece of rebar and a good, hard shove was enough to break the rusted bolts. The door swung inwards into absolute blackness. His helmet lamp cut a narrow beam into the space beyond. Then, with a soft hiss, the room beyond the door lit up, not with the harsh, sterile light of the ship, but with a warm, golden glow that felt utterly, impossibly alien. Finn stepped through the doorway, and his world ended. And a new one began. He was standing in a vast, circular chamber, its ceiling a dome that glowed with the soft light of a gentle sun. And it was filled with life. Green. So much green it overwhelmed his senses. Trees with broad, waxy leaves reached for the artificial sky. Thick, soft grass cushioned his boots. Flowers of colors he had no names for bloomed in a riot of impossible beauty. The air was different. It was rich, thick, and sweet with the scent of damp earth and living things. He took off his helmet, a heretical act, and for the first time in his life, he breathed. Really breathed. In the center of the dome stood a metal spire, a library of life. Thousands of small, metallic drawers lined its surface, each labeled with strange, elegant script. He pulled one open. Inside, nestled on a bed of soft fabric, lay a handful of small, hard, dark objects. Seeds. A label above it read Helianthus annuus. Sunflower. The room was a garden. A secret, impossible garden, hidden in the dead heart of a dying world. It was a truth so profound, so dangerous, it felt like it could tear the ship apart. And in that moment, Finn, the boy who had nothing, was now the keeper of the most dangerous secret in the world, hope. The secret of the garden burned in Finn's mind. He told no one. He went about his duties as a scrapper, the grime and the dust feeling more oppressive than ever, the recycled air tasting like ash in his mouth. The world of the Scarab, once the only reality he knew, now felt like a grey, metal cage. The memory of the green, the scent of the air, the warmth of the artificial sun, it had ruined him for the life he was supposed to live. He began to question everything. The doctrine that the earth was poison, a lie. The belief that nothing could grow, a lie. He saw the faces of the children in the lower decks, pale and sallow, and for the first time, felt not just pity, but a burning, righteous anger. They were being fed a lie to keep them obedient. But the secret was a heavy burden, and he knew he could not carry it alone. He needed someone who could understand, someone who knew what a seed even was. The lower deckers whispered stories of an old woman named Elara, an engineer from the mid-decks who was demoted decades ago. Her crime, hoarding. Not scavenged parts or extra food rations, but books. Paper books from the before times, filled with forbidden knowledge. They called her the Leaf Witch. He found her in a forgotten corner of the maintenance tunnels, a small, cluttered hovel filled with ancient, yellowed books and strange, dried plants she kept in jars. She was old, her face a roadmap of wrinkles, her eyes sharp and suspicious. The change in Elara was instantaneous. The hard, cynical mask fell away, replaced by a look of stunned, disbelieving awe. Her eyes widened. It's a legend, boy. A story the first generation told. A secret project, a failsafe. A biodome built into the core of the ship, carrying the genetic legacy of Earth. Seeds, embryos, everything needed to start again. It was meant to be opened when the Earth was deemed ready for reseeding. Because the first overseer, and everyone since, decided that control was more important than hope. Why risk rebellion for a future that might never come? Why give people a taste of paradise when you can keep them fed and obedient in a cage? They declared the Earth eternally dead, sealed the Arboretum, and erased it from the official histories. They chose the ship over the world. The truth settled on Finn, a weight heavier than any piece of scrap metal. But their whispered conversation had not gone unheard. A loyalist foreman, suspicious of Finn's recent distracted behavior, had followed him. He didn't understand what he overheard, but he understood the tone of conspiracy. He slipped away into the shadows to report what he'd seen to the ship's security. Unaware, Elara took Finn to a hidden corner of her hovel. She pulled aside a ragged curtain, revealing a single, small plant growing in a rusted can under a weak, jury-rigged UV light. It was a simple herb, but to Finn, it was the second most beautiful thing he had ever seen. Elara, I've kept this species alive for 50 years from a single seed I managed to save. It's not much. But it's proof. And now, with the Arboretum. Finn, you haven't just found a garden. You found a future. But the Overseer will do anything to keep that future buried. As she spoke, the distant sound of heavy boots echoing in the main corridor reached them. A squad of black-clad enforcers, the Overseer's brutal security force, was sweeping the deck. They weren't just on a routine patrol. They were searching. She grabbed a small bag of seeds and her most precious books. Together, the old woman and the young boy slipped out a back maintenance hatch, becoming fugitives in the only home they had ever known. The hunt for the galaxy's last gardeners had begun. Finn and Elara were ghosts in their own home, fugitives in the only world they had ever known. They moved through the Scarab's forgotten pathways, a maze of silent, dust-choked maintenance tunnels and decommissioned transport shafts that Elara knew like the lines on her own hand. She had spent decades in these depths after her demotion, exploring the ship's hidden anatomy, learning its secrets. Her forbidden knowledge of the ship's structure, once a hobby born of loneliness, had now become their only means of survival. They found refuge in a decommissioned hydroprocessing unit, a vast, cavernous chamber filled with the skeletal remains of algae tanks and nutrient pipes from a failed attempt at agriculture generations ago. It was a graveyard of manufactured hope, a bitter and ironic place to hide while protecting the real thing. We can rest here for a shift. They won't search this deep. This sector was declared structurally unsound a century ago. She rummaged through her bag and pulled out one of her precious books, its pages yellowed and soft. Here, boy. You've seen a garden. Now it's time you learned what one was for. Under the weak beam of Finn's helmet lamp, Elara opened the book. For the first time, Finn saw not just diagrams and text, but images of the before times. He saw pictures of vast green forests under a blue sky, of animals he couldn't name, of people swimming in a massive body of water called an ocean. Elara read to him about seasons, about rain, about the simple, profound magic of planting a seed and watching it grow into food. No, child. The earth fed them. The ship was never meant to be a permanent home. It was an ark. A temporary sanctuary. A promise made by the first generation that we would one day return. A promise our leaders chose to forget, because a promise gives you hope, but a cage gives you control. This was Finn's true education. In the dark, surrounded by the ghosts of failed hydroponics, he was learning about a world of life. The anger he felt was no longer just for himself, but for the generations of lower deckers who had been born and died in the dark, never knowing the truth of what they had lost. The garden was no longer just a secret he had to protect, it was a birthright he had to reclaim for everyone. Far above them, in the sterile, silent command deck at the apex of the Scarab, Overseer Valerius looked out at the rolling, dead landscape of the earth below. He stood before his council, his face a mask of calm, calculated authority. With him was Commander Jorik, the iron-fisted leader of the enforcers, his black uniform a stark contrast to the white robes of the council members. The breach was in Sector Theta 9, a decommissioned hold near the primary salvage bays. The outer door was forced. The foreman reported a scrapper named Finn acting erratically, and later, consorting with the demoted engineer, Elara. An enforcer stepped forward and placed Elara's single, potted herb on the council table. It was small and fragile, but in the sterile white room, it seemed to scream with a vibrant, impossible green. The council members recoiled as if from a venomous snake. Heresy. The doctrine is clear. Nothing grows. The earth is poison. There are whispers in the lower decks, Overseer. Rumors of the boy's discovery. They are faint, but they are spreading. The story is, of a garden. Valerius, a garden. He spoke the word as if it were a curse. He turned to Jorik, his voice now low and dangerous. This is not about a boy and an old woman. This is a virus. Of the mind. Hope. Hope is the most dangerous contaminant that can be introduced into a closed system like our ship. It creates dissent. It breeds rebellion. It will lead to chaos and collapse, and the end of us all. I have maintained peace on this ship for 50 years by ensuring there is no alternative. You will find them, Commander. You will find this garden, and you will sterilize it. And you will bring me the heretics. I want this infection quarantined and cleansed, quietly and completely. Valerius gave the order, and the character of the ship began to change. No longer just a routine search, it was now a focused, relentless hunt. He sealed the transport shafts between the lower and middle decks, trapping Finn and Elara in the ship's grimy underbelly. Enforcer patrols, armed with stun pikes and thermal scanners, became a constant, menacing presence. The lockdown caught Finn and Elara in the middle of a transit tunnel. They were trapped. For days, they survived in the darkness, sharing the last of their nutrient packs, listening to the rhythmic stomp of enforcer patrols in the corridors around them. Finn, we can't stay here forever. We'll starve. And they'll find us eventually. You're right. Hiding isn't enough. A secret is useless if it dies with you. We have to show them. We have to show everyone. Finn, show them how. We can't lead the whole lower deck to the Arboretum. No. We don't have to bring them to the garden. We have to bring the garden to them. Her finger traced a path on the dusty schematic. The Arboretum is a self-contained ecosystem. It has its own power, its own water, and its own atmosphere. Its ventilation system is powerful enough to recycle air for 1,000 different species. And its sun, it's just a high-yield holographic projector. The systems are isolated, but they can be rerouted. You want to pump the air from the garden into the decks. And more. We can hijack the public view screen network in the lower decks and project the image of the Arboretum onto them. We can let them breathe the truth and see the truth, all at once. The plan was audacious, brilliant, and incredibly dangerous. It turned their goal from mere survival into a daring counterattack. No longer were they fugitives fleeing from something, they were pilgrims on a mission, racing towards their holy site. They began their perilous journey back towards Sector Theta 9, using Alara's knowledge to navigate the deepest, most dangerous parts of the ship's substructure. Meanwhile, Commander Jorik's investigation was closing in. They had found the abandoned hydroprocessing unit. They knew their targets were moving back towards the site of the original breach. Jorik set up a cordon, sealing all access points to Theta 9, stationing his best troops at every junction. Finn and Alara reached the final hurdle, a massive, churning gear room that controlled the rotation of the Scarab's colossal salvage treads. A precarious network of gantries was their only path across a pit of churning, grinding metal. They were halfway across when the lights flooded the chamber. On the far side of the gantry, blocking their path to the Arboretum's secret door, stood Commander Jorik and a dozen enforcers. On the side they had just come from, another squad appeared, cutting off their retreat. They were trapped on a narrow metal walkway, suspended over a pit of certain death, with the full force of the overseer's will bearing down on them. Finn. Alara. There is nowhere left to run. The overseer demands your surrender. The heresy ends now. Finn and Alara were trapped. Before them lay the path to humanity's future, the secret door to the Arboretum. Behind them, a squad of black-clad enforcers blocked their retreat. Below them, the churning, grinding gears of the Scarab's main treads promised a swift and final oblivion. Commander Jorik stood on the far gantry, his face grim and unyielding, a black iron statue of absolute authority. The heresy ends now. Surrender the scrapper and the old woman. The overseer has commanded it. Jorik raised his hand, a signal for his men to advance. The enforcers began to move forward along the narrow walkways, their stun pikes crackling with contained energy. There was no escape. But Alara was not a warrior, she was an engineer. She knew the ship's weaknesses, its forgotten nerves and arteries. The main power conduit for this sector's lighting runs right under this gantry. See that junction box? She pointed to a corroded panel just off the walkway. Break it. Now, Finn didn't hesitate. While the enforcer's attention was on Alara, he swung a loose piece of rebar he was carrying like a club, smashing it into the rusted junction box. In the chaos and confusion, Alara grabbed Finn's arm, pulling him towards the edge of the gantry. Below them was not just the grinding pit, but a massive, greasy maintenance chain, moving slowly as it lubricated the primary gears. It was a dangerous, desperate leap. They jumped. They landed hard on the moving chain, the impact knocking the wind from Finn's lungs. They were plunged into the oily darkness of the ship's deepest guts, leaving Jorik and his men stranded on the gantry above, their lights now searching frantically for targets that had simply vanished. They had escaped, but now Jorik knew their exact destination. It was a race. For an hour, they navigated the hellish, roaring interior of the tread mechanism, Alara guiding them with an unerring sense of direction. They finally emerged through a ventilation shaft, covered in grime and grease, into a silent corridor right before the secret, circular door of the Arboretum. They had made it. But as Finn reached for the ancient locking mechanism, he heard the sound of approaching, disciplined footsteps. Jorik, furious at being outsmarted, had taken a direct, secured access route and was moments away. They scrambled inside, sealing the heavy door behind them just as the flashlights of Jorik's squad swept across the corridor outside. They were safe, for now. Finn leaned against the cool metal of the door, his heart hammering, and took in the sight of the garden once more. It was a paradise under siege. The peaceful hum of the dome's life support now seemed fragile, threatened by the sounds from outside, the angry shouts, the metallic clang as the enforcers began to assault the door. She ran to the control spire at the heart of the garden, its surface covered in dormant, holographic interfaces. Finn followed, his awe at the garden now mixed with a desperate, burning fear. They chose to keep this beauty locked away, to let our people forget the feel of real air. Today, we will make them remember. She placed her hand on the console. The spire came to life, filling the dome with glowing schematics of the ship's environmental systems. With Finn's youthful speed assisting her aged expertise, they began the hack of their lives. Ilara, with the knowledge of a master engineer, bypassed decades of security lockouts, rerouting the Arboretum's powerful ventilation system. Finn, with a scrapper's intuition for finding value in forgotten things, located the ship's public viewscreen network and began calibrating the dome's holographic sun to project its image. The ramming at the door grew louder, more frantic. They were almost out of time. Then, with a final, deafening crash, the door was breached. Overseer Valerius himself stepped through the ruined doorway, flanked by Commander Jorik and his elite guards. He stopped dead, his calm, authoritative mask faltering for a single moment as he took in the impossible sight of the thriving garden. Then, his face hardened into a mask of cold, righteous fury. So the heresy is real. Look at this chaos you've wrought. This is what hope does. It makes you risk everything, our perfect, balanced world, our survival, for a fantasy in a bottle. I am saving humanity from this delusion. He turned to Jorik. Destroy the control spire. Burn this entire chamber. Cleanse the dash. Before he could finish the sentence, Ilara looked at Finn, a fierce, triumphant smile on her face, and slammed her hand down on the activation key. The effect was instantaneous. A great, rushing wind filled the Arboretum as the ventilation system, on maximum power, began to pump the dome's clean, rich, pollen-filled air out into the ship. At the same time, the golden, holographic sun above them flickered, its image diverting. The scene cut to the grimy, crowded, central plaza of the lower decks. 1,000 workers on their shift break looked up in confusion. A new smell was filling the air, pouring from the ventilation grates. It was a smell none of them had ever known, sweet, earthy, and alive. People stopped, inhaling deeply, their faces filled with confusion and wonder. Then, the massive public view screens that normally displayed propaganda and production quotas flickered. They did not show the face of the overseer. They showed a live feed of the impossible, thriving garden. Back in the Arboretum, Valerius watched in horror as his power evaporated. There was no riot. No violent uprising. Just a quiet, profound, and absolute rebellion of awe. The foundation of his rule, the great lie of the dead earth, had been shattered. He ordered his men to fire, but the enforcers, breathing the same clean air, seeing the same impossible image, hesitated. Their stun pikes lowered slightly. How could they fight for a commander? Jorik looked from the face of his stunned overseer to the faces of his hesitating men, and then to the garden itself. He slowly, deliberately, powered down his own weapon. Valerius was no longer an overseer. He was just a man in a room full of plants, his ideology rendered extinct. The future of the Scarab was born in that moment. Weeks later, the great ship still crawled across the dead earth, but its heart had been transformed. The Arboretum was now the center of their world. Ilara, no longer a witch but a revered teacher, held classes for the children, their hands, once stained with grease, now stained with rich soil. Valerius was confined to his quarters, his council dissolved, replaced by a new one made up of engineers, scrappers, and scientists. Finn stood at the entrance to the dome, no longer a secret entrance, but a gateway. He was its guardian. He looked out at the corridors of the lower decks, where the first, clumsy, hopeful hydroponic gardens were being built, their plans displayed on the same screens that once showed propaganda. The harvester was no longer just a tomb. It was becoming a nursery. A young girl, no older than 7, her face still pale but her eyes bright with a new kind of light, walked up to him. Finn smiled, and reached into his pocket. He pulled out a single, small, striped sunflower seed and placed it in her open palm. The future would be difficult. It would be a long, slow, and arduous process of relearning and rebuilding. But for the first time in 300 years, it had been planted.